Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm sharing a story that you might have actually lived through yourself, and trust me, it's a love story. Are you ready? Let's go! She had been a nurse for 31 years and thought she had seen everything. But the moment she pulled back that curtain and saw what was in front of her, her hands went completely still. Because what that 27-year-old man was hiding under those hospital sheets was something no woman in his life had ever been able to handle. Until her... Oh my goodness, girls, you are absolutely not going to believe the story I am about to tell you tonight. I was sitting at my kitchen table last week, going through some old letters a friend of mine sent me, and she mentioned this woman she had known for years, a nurse named Patricia, 58 years old, working at a hospital in Philadelphia. And when my friend told me what happened to Patricia, I put down my coffee cup and I just sat there with my mouth open. Because this is not just a love story, girls. This is a story about a woman who had given everything to everyone around her for her entire life and had completely forgotten, what it felt like to be seen. So pour yourself something warm, get comfortable, and let me tell you about Patricia. Patricia had been walking those hospital hallways since she was 27 years old. 31 years of early mornings, double shifts, cold coffee, and tired feet. She knew every corner of that building, every squeaky wheel on every medication cart, every flickering light in the East Wing corridor. Philadelphia General was not just her workplace, it was her second home. Maybe if she was being honest with herself on the quiet nights, it was her first home, because the one she went back to every evening was very, very silent. Patricia had been divorced for 11 years. Her daughter lived in Denver and called on Sundays when she remembered. Her son was in the military and sent short messages on holidays. She was not bitter about any of it. She had raised them well and they had their own lives, and she understood that. But understanding something and not feeling the weight of it are two very different things. And Patricia felt the weight of her silence every single night when she turned the key in her front door and stepped into a house that did not notice she had come home. At work, though, Patricia was a different woman. She was sharp, calm, quick on her feet, and her patients adored her. The younger nurses called her Miss Patricia with a kind of quiet respect that she never asked for, but had simply earned over the years. She had a way of making people feel safe, a way of sitting at the edge of a bed and making someone feel like the most important person in the building. That was her gift. She gave it freely, and she gave it constantly, and she almost never kept any of it for herself. Now, girls, here is where the story starts to get interesting. It was a Tuesday morning in the late October, one of those gray Philadelphia mornings where the sky looks like it cannot decide whether to rain or just stay miserable, when a young man was brought into her ward. His name was Daniel, 27 years old. He had collapsed during a morning run in Fairmount Park, and a woman walking her dog had called 911. When Patricia came on shift and reviewed his chart, she noticed something that made her pause. He had been seen at 2 other hospitals in the past 3 years for similar episodes: dizziness, sudden weakness, elevated heart rate. And every single time, after running every test available, the doctors had written the same thing in the notes: no conclusive diagnosis. Cause undetermined, patient discharged in stable condition. Patricia stood at the nurse's station holding that chart for a long moment. No conclusive diagnosis. 3 times. She looked down the hallway toward room 14 where Daniel had been settled, and she made a decision that she would later describe to my friend as the most instinctive thing she had ever done in 31 years of nursing. She decided she was going to figure out what was wrong with this young man herself. She walked into room 14 and pulled back the curtain, and that was the moment, girls. That was the exact moment my friend described to me. Patricia told her that when she saw Daniel lying there, she did not see a patient. She saw something that stopped her completely. Not because of anything dramatic or obvious, but because this young man looked at her with the most exhausted eyes she had ever seen on a person his age. Not physically exhausted, soul exhausted. Like someone who had been carrying something impossibly heavy for a very long time and had simply run out of road. Patricia sat down in the chair beside his bed, which was not something she typically did in the first 5 minutes with a new patient, and she said something that surprised even herself. She said, and I am quoting my friend here exactly, she said to him, "Nobody has actually listened to you yet, have they?" And it was not a question. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and then his eyes filled with tears and he shook his head. And Patricia said, "Okay, I am listening now. Take your time." What came out over the next 40 minutes was not a medical history, it was a life. Daniel had grown up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of town where men did not talk about weakness and doctors were something you only saw when a bone was visibly broken. His father had the same episodes his entire adult life and had simply lived with them, refused to discuss them, and died at 63 from a cardiac event that the family was told could have been managed if caught earlier. Daniel had inherited not only the condition, but also the silence around it. He had moved to Philadelphia for work 3 years ago, had tried to get answers, and each time had walked away from a hospital feeling more invisible than when he walked in. He had never told anyone the full story, not a friend, not a coworker, not the woman he had dated briefly the year before who had eventually told him he was too closed off to be with. Patricia listened to every word. She asked questions that nobody had asked him before. Not about symptoms and timelines, but about his daily life, his stress levels, his sleep, his family history in detail, his relationship with his own body. And by the end of that conversation, she had a theory, a real one. She brought it to the attending physician with her notes and her observations, and 3 days later, Daniel had a diagnosis. A hereditary heart rhythm condition, completely manageable with medication and lifestyle adjustments, that had been missed 3 times because nobody had taken the time to hear the whole story. Daniel was discharged on a Friday afternoon. Patricia was finishing her charting at the nurse's station when he stopped in front of her on his way out. He was dressed in his own clothes, a grey jacket and dark jeans, and he looked entirely different from the exhausted young man who had arrived on Tuesday morning. He held out his hand, and when she shook it, he said, "You are the first person who ever made me feel like my life was worth figuring out." Patricia told my friend that she smiled and said something professional and kind and watched him walk down the hallway toward the elevator. And then she sat back down and stared at her screen and felt something shift inside her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. 3 weeks later, Daniel came back to the hospital, not as a patient. He had brought a small plant for the nurse's station, one of those little green ones in a terracotta pot, and a handwritten card that said thank you to the whole team. But he asked specifically for Patricia. They talked for 20 minutes in the hallway outside the ward. He told her his medication was working, that he had been sleeping better, that he had started telling people the truth about his health instead of deflecting. He seemed lighter. He seemed like a person who had been given permission to exist fully for the first time. After he left that day, Patricia went home and sat in her quiet kitchen and thought about the way he had looked at her when they talked. Not with the desperate gratitude of a patient, but with something more like recognition. Like he was looking at someone who understood something essential about what it meant to carry a weight alone. And Patricia, who had been carrying her own weight alone for 11 years, understood that look better than almost anyone. He came back again 2 weeks after that, and then again. It was never planned, never awkward, never anything that anyone could point to and define clearly. He would bring coffee sometimes, or stop by on his lunch break if he was working nearby. They would talk. About his health at first, and then about books, and then about their families, and then about the kind of things people only talk about when they have decided, without quite saying so, that they trust each other completely. Patricia told my friend that she kept waiting for it to feel inappropriate, because she kept reminding herself of the distance between 58 and 27. She kept looking for the moment when she would feel foolish, but that moment never came. What came instead was the slow and quiet realization that Daniel made her feel like the most interesting person in any room they were in together. That he asked her questions nobody had asked her in years. That when she talked, he listened the way she had spent 31 years teaching herself to listen to others. It was Daniel who said it first. They were walking along the Squealkill River on a Sunday afternoon in December, the cold coming off the water in long, slow waves, and he stopped walking and turned to her and said, "Patricia, I know this is not simple. I know there is a distance between us that people will notice and have opinions about. But I have not felt this way about being around another person in my entire life, and I think you deserve to know that." Patricia stood there in the cold Philadelphia air and looked at this 27-year-old man who had collapsed in a park 2 months earlier, and she thought about 11 years of silent evenings and Sunday phone calls from Denver, and the key in the front door of a house that did not notice her. And she said, "I know it is not simple either. but simple has not been working out very well for either of us. Girls, I have been thinking about Patricia's story ever since my friend told it to me, and I keep coming back to one thing. 31 years of taking care of everyone else. 31 years of being the person who listened, who stayed calm, who made everyone feel safe. And it took a 27-year-old man collapsing in a park and ending up in her ward on a grey Tuesday morning for someone to finally walk into her life and decide that she was worth listening to in return. I do not think love has an age requirement. I do not think the heart checks a calendar before it decides to feel something. Patricia was not looking for Daniel. She was not looking for anything except to do her job well. And that is exactly when it found her, when she was simply being herself, fully and completely, without any expectation of what might come back to her in return. I think there is something in that for all of us girls, something worth sitting with tonight. If Patricia's story touched something in you tonight, I want you to know that you are not alone in feeling it. These stories find us because somewhere inside we recognize them. If you are sitting in a quiet house tonight and this felt a little too familiar, I see you. And I want you to come back next time because I have another story waiting that I think you are going to need to hear. Go ahead and follow this channel so you do not miss it. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this tonight, share it with them. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for another person is simply say, "Hey, I thought of you when I heard this." I will see you in the next one, girls. Take care of yourselves.